Hello, my name is Charlize Leslie-Barrera, and my AP research project was on police brutality against Black Americans in Republican states. My research question was, what are the major factors of police brutality against Black Americans within predominantly Republican states? And this is how I was led to my question. In August of 2025, approximately 7 months ago, a video was circling the internet of a Black man being brutally beaten by a group of white policemen in Jacksonville, Florida. This man was pulled over for a said broken taillight, and then it escalated quickly from there. My sister lives in Jacksonville, Florida, so I naturally grew concerned. I began to mentally weigh her chances of meeting the same fate as the man on the internet. Does her color matter? Does her gender matter? Are there characteristics of hers that differ from the man on the internet, and do they play an important role? During the same time in my AP research class, we were creating research question ideas. That's when I was led to my question. The first method I will be using in my research will be comparative analysis. I will compare police violent reportings from 3 Democratic states, California, Illinois, and New York, and 3 Republican states, Texas, Florida, and Mississippi. I will be using the time range from year 2020 to 2024. The second method I will be using is a correlational study. I will be measuring Black civilian characteristics. For age, I will test if it has a positive, negative, or no correlation relationship with use of force incidents. For gender, I will be using a point by serial correlational study. My binary variable will be male and female, and my continuous variable will be use of force incidents. I will then test the correlation between those 2 variables. The goal of my research is to highlight what the major factors of police brutality are to help spread awareness for structural inequalities that can be predominantly seen in Republican states. Awareness like this can help communities identify and protect those in risk around them. If a police officer's claim against a Black civilian seems suspicious, communities can join together and truly understand that it wasn't actually about fear running through the police officer, rather it was hatred and prejudice. In terms of literature that helped shape my research the most, there were 2 pieces of scholarly work that stuck out the most. The first source was titled Stop Resisting, an exploratory study of police brutality and its impacts on Black and Latino males, their communities, mental health, and healing, by Manuel Ortiz. His study focused on racial profiling. He discussed the different coping mechanisms minority groups have, but specifically highlighted Latino and Black men. This rose the idea that gender may be a major factor of police brutality and further brought up the possibility of other factors. If I can consider gender, wouldn't I be able to consider age as well? Another source was by Meredith Warden, titled Sitting in the Room with History, Lynchings, Police Brutality, and Spectacle. Her study compared historic and modern police hate crime data to highlight the similarities to promote awareness. This fueled my assumption that the Republican states in my study would have significantly higher police brutality rates than Democratic states, due to the past of Southern and conservative states. My conclusion from these scholarly articles were that gender and age are possible major factors of police brutality, and that the history of a state may influence their hate crime rates. Then I started researching. When gathering data, I had to focus on secondary sources. I used the Mapping Police Violence website, the Washington Post Police Violence Database, and the FBI CDE Police Violence Database. All data ranged from the year 2020 to 2024. After I gathered the data from each of the 6 states from each of the 3 sources, I needed to average out the numbers. To make sure that there was no method error while doing so, I went to the U.S. Census Bureau website and gathered the percentage of Black Americans in each state. I then multiplied that decimal by the total population of the state. From there, I divided the number of victims by the Black population of the state and multiplied it by 100,000 to make each piece of data per 100K. To measure the correlation for the age, I used the filters provided by Washington Post Police Violence Database and calculated the numbers from there. For the gender, I used the same filters. After I gathered the number of victims by age, I plugged them into a point by serial correlation calculator to receive my answer. And these are my results. In this graph, you can see that California surpassed the other 5 states and had the highest amount of police violent reportings, averaging around 40 victims per 100,000 from the years 2020 to 2024. In this graph, you can see that California's numbers did cause the Democratic states' average to be higher than the Republican states, therefore concluding that Democratic states have higher amounts of police violence, according to published reports. In my correlational graph for age, I did see that age range from 30 to 44 was targeted the most in Republican states. But generalized, there was no correlational relationship between these two variables. For the point by serial correlation, there was a moderately positive correlation. To identify whether the correlation is positive, negative, or non-existent, it is placed on a number line from -1 to 1. My number was 0.5547. Therefore, my results was moderately positive. For my results to be statistically significant, my p-value needs to be less than 0.05. My p-value is 0.0049, therefore concluding that it is statistically significant. In conclusion, my research provided opposing results to my hypotheses, with my hypothesis being that red states would have higher police brutality rates than blue states was proved wrong. I also believe that there would be a more positive correlation between age and use of force incidents, but there was no results that proved that, since there was a no correlational relationship. In my point by serial correlation, however, I did discover that Black men had higher chances of being victims, which is also a hypothesis of mine, meaning those results proved me correct. However, there is a limitation to my findings. First, there is a political bias. The Washington Post is known to swing democratically, which may have affected my data. Another limitation is the affinity bias. This means I am more prone to favor those similar to me. As a Black American and a Black woman, I do hold opinions on this topic that could have interfered with the way I went about conducting my research. I may have also favored those without purposefully doing so. Oral defense question 1. What was one obstacle or challenge you encountered while performing the research, and how did you address it? One challenge I ran into was trying to graph my point by serial correlation. Most of the program that can properly make that kind of graph required paid software, which I didn't have access to. To address this type of challenge, I adapted my presentation method rather than removing my analysis. Instead of displaying the graph visually, I focused on clearly explaining the statistical findings in words. I described the type of correlation, what each variable represented, and what the correlational coefficient and p-value indicated. By breaking down each component of the results, I ensured my audience could still understand the relationship between gender and police violence without needing the visual representation. Oral defense question 2. How might your conclusions, findings, or products relate to the current body of work in the community or field? My findings relate to current research because many previous studies show that Black Americans experience high levels of police violence due to structural inequality and historical discrimination. My study supports these conclusions using recent statistical data while adding a new perspective by comparing political regions and analyzing demographic factors such as age and gender. This strengthens existing research by providing clear comparisons and more specific patterns within affected communities, such as the Black American community. Oral defense number 3. If you had 3 more months to work on this research question or project goal, what additional research strategies would you put into practice? If I had 3 more months to continue this project, I would explore another possible factor, Black ancestry proportions. I would examine whether multiracial Black individuals experience different rates of police violence compared to individuals that identify as fully Black in America. This could possibly reveal if racial proportions and identity influence the police violent rates. To do this, I would use data from the U.S. Census Bureau website, which provides detailed population information on both single-race and multiracial Black Americans. I would then compare these population percentages with victim data across the 6 states that I included in my study previously to identify any additional patterns or relationships.